1967 was not just a year. It was a feeling. A moment when music stopped being background noise and became something you needed to survive. That year, certain songs came out of nowhere. They were slow. They were heavy with emotion. They carried weight. Real weight. Not the kind you hear with your ears. The kind you feel somewhere deep in your chest. Ballads. Pure ballads. Songs that made grown people stop what they were doing and just feel. But here is the thing most people get wrong about 1967. They think they know which songs defined that year. They don't. Not really.
When we call out for a drink.
Because the songs that truly changed everything that year were not always the ones that got the most radio play. Some of them were hidden. Some of them were buried. And some of them were so powerful, the industry tried to move past them as fast as possible. Today we count down 10 unforgettable ballads that defined 1967. By the time we reach number 1, you will hear that year completely differently. Let's go. Number 10, The Righteous Brothers. You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'.
There's no tenderness like grief in your...
Now, I know what you might be thinking. You have heard this song 100 times. You know it. You think you know everything about it. But stay with me, because there is a layer to this record that most people completely miss. Close your eyes for just a second and think about 1967. The world was changing fast. Too fast for some people. There were protests in the streets. There was tension in homes.
You're trying hard not to show it.
Young people were pulling away from their parents. Marriages were cracking under pressure. And in the middle of all that noise and confusion, this song came on the radio.
But baby,
and everything stopped. That opening, that slow, heavy, aching opening, it did not sound like a pop song, it sounded like a confession. Like somebody actually sitting across from the person they love and saying something is wrong between us. Something is gone, and I do not know how to get it back.
I know it. You lost that love.
That feeling was everywhere in 1967. In living rooms, in kitchens, in cars parked outside houses where people were not ready to go inside yet. This record was produced by Phil Spector, and if you know music history, that name carries enormous weight. Phil Spector built what became known as the Wall of Sound. Layers and layers of instrumentation stacked so thick and so rich that the music felt like it was coming from inside your own head rather than from speakers. The record was released on Phil's Records, and the production was so ambitious, so expensive for its time, that when the label saw the budget, they nearly shut the whole thing down before it was finished. The song itself had actually been recorded slightly earlier and gained traction before 1967, but 1967 was the year it truly embedded itself into the cultural fabric.
There's no welcome look in your eye.
Radio stations kept pulling it back. DJs could not let it go. And in the UK, where the emotional soul sound was deeply respected, this record found a second and third life on dance floors and in listening rooms.
When I reach for you.
The lyrics are devastating in the most honest way. They are about watching love die slowly. Not with a fight. Not with a dramatic moment.
You're starting to...
Just one day, you look at the person across from you and realize the warmth in their eyes when they look at you is gone. That is a specific kind of pain. And very few songs have ever described it this accurately.
Such little things I do.
Here is something that will genuinely surprise you. When this record was first being prepared for UK release, the label worried that British radio programmers would find the running time too long, considered editing it down.
It makes me just feel like crying.
There were real conversations about cutting one of the most important emotional builds in the entire song. Thankfully, those conversations went nowhere.
'Cause baby,
The full version survived. And that full version is part of why the song hits as hard as it does. You cannot rush grief. You cannot edit heartbreak down to a shorter running time.
something beautiful about you. You lost.
But why does this song sometimes get overlooked in serious music conversation? Partly because it became so familiar. When a song gets played enough times, people stop hearing it. It becomes wallpaper. It becomes the thing that plays in the background of a movie scene, and you do not even register it consciously anymore. That familiarity is actually a kind of forgetting. You think you know the song, but when did you last truly listen to it? When did you last let it actually reach you? That is the quiet tragedy of songs this powerful. They become so known that they become unknown. Put some headphones on tonight. Play this record alone, in the dark, and tell me you are ready for what it does to you.
You lost that love and now it's gone.
The next song on our list was made by a man whose voice sounded like it came from somewhere much older than his years. A voice that carried the weight of everything people were afraid to say out loud in 1967. Number 9, Otis Redding, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting.
I need to be honest with you about something before we go any further with this entry. This song was recorded in 1967, but Otis Redding never heard it on the radio. He never saw it reach number 1. He never held a chart position paper with his name at the top.
When the evening comes, watching.
He recorded this song just 3 days before he died in a plane crash on December 10th, 1967. He was 26 years old. Take a moment with that. 26 years old.
The ships roll in, and then I watch them roll away.
And what he left behind was this. A song so complete, so deeply human, so quietly perfect that it has never, not once in nearly 60 years, stopped feeling relevant.
Way again, yeah. I'm sitting on the dock.
It never stopped feeling like something a real person made while sitting with real feelings on a real afternoon, watching real water move. The scene this song creates is so vivid you can almost feel the cold air coming off the bay. You can almost hear the seagulls.
Watching the tide roll.
You can feel the stillness of someone who has stopped running, stopped chasing, stopped trying to force life into a shape it does not want to take. Someone who is just sitting, watching, accepting. That is a profound thing to put into a pop song in 1967.
Sitting on the dock of the bay.
Most music that year was still trying to be upbeat, trying to move you forward, trying to make you dance or dream or hope. Otis Redding made a song about stillness, about the peace and the sadness of having nowhere left to go.
Wasting time.
The record was produced by Steve Cropper at Stax Studios in Memphis, Tennessee, one of the most important recording studios in American music history. Stax had a sound, a warmth.
I left my home in Georgia.
A realness that came from musicians playing together in the same room, feeding off each other's energy. And on this session, that energy was different, quieter, more internal.
Headed for the Frisco Bay.
People who were in the studio that day have said in interviews since that Otis seemed different, reflective, like he was making something he knew mattered in a way he could not fully explain.
I've had nothing to live for.
The whistling at the end of the song that was improvised. There were no finished lyrics for the final section. Otis whistled it as a placeholder, intending to come back and write the words later.
It look like nothing's gonna come my way, so
He never got the chance. And that whistling, that unfinished, unplanned, completely human moment, became one of the most recognizable endings in the history of recorded music.
just gonna sit on the dock of the bay, watching
The song was released posthumously in January 1968 and went straight to #1. It stayed there for 4 weeks. It became the first posthumous #1 single in U.S. chart history.
tide roll away.
Here is the thing about why this song is sometimes underrated in certain conversations. Because it is so associated with Otis Redding's death, people sometimes listen to it through the lens of tragedy rather than through the lens of the music itself.
Sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
They hear the story before they hear the song. And that can actually create a barrier between you and what the record is really doing, which is offering you permission to stop, to breathe, to accept where you are right now instead of torturing yourself about where you think you should be. That is a gift. That is what great music does. And Otis Redding gave it to the world in the last days of his life. Every time this song plays, he is still sitting on that dock, still watching, still at peace. And that never stops being beautiful.
Look like nothing's gonna change.
If this video is giving you something real today, smash that like button. It costs you nothing and it means everything for keeping this music history alive.
Everything still remains the same. I can't.
The next entry is one that split people right down the middle in 1967. Some called it the most romantic song ever recorded. Others said it was too slow, too old-fashioned, too soft for the times. They were all wrong in the most wonderful way.
If this song just hit you in that quiet place, don't let this moment be a one-time thing. Subscribe to Demo. We're building a home for real R&B and soul. The kind that heals, the kind that tells the truth. Hit subscribe and come back whenever you need a song that understands you.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 8, Engelbert Humperdinck, Release Me. Now, before you skip forward, stay right here. Because this record did something in 1967 that no song has managed to do since. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck stopped the Beatles from having a #1 single. Read that again. In 1967, at the height of Beatlemania, when the Beatles were the most powerful force in popular music on the entire planet, Engelbert Humperdinck's Release Me sat at #1 in the UK for 6 weeks and kept the Beatles' double A-side single Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever from reaching the top spot.
For I don't love you.
That is not a trivia fact. That is a seismic event in music history. And most people who were not alive in 1967 have absolutely no idea it happened. So who was Engelbert Humperdinck? He was a British singer born Arnold George Dorsey in Madras, India, to a British family who had spent years trying to break through in the music industry with very little success. He had changed his name, he had worked the club circuit, he had watched peers get opportunities that passed him by, and then in his early 30s, which in the pop world of the 1960s was practically considered old, he recorded this song, and everything changed overnight. The song itself is about a man asking his partner to let him go. He has fallen out of love. He has found someone new. And he is asking, not demanding, not fighting, just asking, with sadness and with honesty, to be released from a relationship that no longer holds love on his side.
Release me.
That is a complicated, emotional position. In 1967, singing about wanting to leave a marriage was not simple. It was not comfortable. Divorce carried enormous social stigma.
And let me love again.
And yet this song treated the subject with such gentleness, such genuine sorrow, it did not cast anyone as a villain. It just held the pain of the situation and let it breathe. The production was classic British ballad-style rich orchestration, a slow and stately tempo, with Humperdinck's voice at the center doing all the emotional heavy lifting. And that voice, deep, warm, aching in all the right places.
I have found a new love.
It was the kind of voice that made you feel like the person singing had actually lived every word. Here is your fun fact. The song was not new in 1967. It had been recorded multiple times by different artists over the previous decade and had never broken through in any significant way. When Engelbert Humperdinck recorded his version, the song was already considered something of an industry also ran, a song that had had its chances and missed every time. His version did not just rescue the song, it made the song immortal. Why is it sometimes left out of serious 1967 music discussions? Because it was considered too mainstream, too easy, too comfortable at a time when critics wanted music to be challenging and revolutionary. The counterculture movement of 1967 had very clear ideas about what was cool, and a slow, orchestrated ballad by a man in a dinner jacket was not it. Critics dismissed it. Music journalists moved past it. But 6 weeks at #1 does not lie. The people knew. The people always know. Sometimes the critics and the audience are listening to completely different things. And in 1967, the audience chose Release Me. Number 7. Scott Walker. Joanna.
Joanna, I can't.
Scott Walker is one of those artists who sits in a very strange place in music history. If you know him deeply. If you have never discovered him, you are about to understand why people who love music talk about him the way they do.
Forget the one they call Joanna.
In 1967, Scott Walker was at a crossroads. He had been part of the Walker Brothers, a hugely successful group in the UK that had topped the charts and filled concert halls. The group had recently split.
We own the summer hand.
And Scott Walker, stepping out on his own, had a decision to make. He could play it safe, make easy pop music, chase the charts with whatever was working that week. He did not do that.
In hand, Joanna.
Instead, he started making music that was, for lack of a better word, cinematic, big, orchestrated, deeply emotional, in a way that felt more European than British.
And now she's always.
He was inspired by artists like Jacques Brel, the Belgian singer-songwriter whose work was dark and theatrical and achingly human. And he brought that influence into his own work in a way that was genuinely unique in British pop in 1967.
Just a tear away.
Joanna sits right at the heart of that transition. It is a love song, but it does not feel like a pop love song. It feels like the soundtrack to a black and white film. The kind of film where the ending is uncertain and the emotions are complicated and you leave the cinema feeling slightly changed. The orchestration on this record is extraordinary. Lush strings, careful, deliberate pacing. and Scott Walker's voice, which was a genuine baritone instrument, not the kind of voice the pop charts usually made room for, moving through the melody with absolute conviction. The lyrics speak about longing, about a love that exists at a slight distance, not quite reached, not quite lost, that space between having someone and truly connecting with them. That emotional geography is difficult to map in a pop song. Scott Walker mapped it perfectly. Fun fact, Scott Walker's popularity in the UK during this period was extraordinary, in ways that are hard to fully comprehend now. Fan mail was arriving in such volumes that it had to be handled by a dedicated team. Teenage girls were sending him hundreds of letters a week. And yet the music he was drawn to making was becoming more and more serious, more and more literary, more and more removed from the world of teenage pop fandom. He was pulling away from the very audience that adored him, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. That tension between commercial success and artistic truth is something that would define his entire career. Why is Joanna sometimes overlooked today? Partly because Scott Walker's later work became so experimental and avant-garde that it overshadowed his earlier recordings in critical conversation. People who discovered Scott Walker through his later albums sometimes looked back at his 1967 work and considered it too conventional. And people who loved his pop period sometimes felt alienated by his later work. He fell between two audiences and neither fully claimed the whole of him. But Joanna deserves to be heard on its own terms, as exactly what it is. A perfectly made, deeply felt ballad from a man who was already becoming something the pop world did not have a category for.
You made the man a child.
The next entry on this list is one that was recorded in a moment of genuine personal turmoil, and you can hear every bit of that turmoil in every single note. Number 6, Dusty Springfield, The Look of Love. There are certain voices in music history that are more than voices. They are emotional environments. You do not just hear them, you step inside them. Dusty Springfield had one of those voices, and in 1967, with The Look of Love, she created one of the most intimate, most sensually emotional recordings of the entire decade. This is a song that feels like a secret, like something whispered rather than sung, like a private moment that you have accidentally walked into and cannot bring yourself to leave. The production came from the legendary Burt Bacharach and Hal David, two of the most gifted songwriting and production minds of the 20th century. Bacharach understood something fundamental about how to frame a female voice in a recording. He understood space. He understood silence. He understood that sometimes what you do not play is more powerful than what you do. And on The Look of Love, every musical choice is deliberate, refined, and completely in service of Dusty's performance. The song was written for the 1967 James Bond film Casino Royale, the satirical, non-canonical version, not the serious franchise. And in that film context, the song might easily have been forgotten as just another movie tie-in. But Dusty Springfield's recording had a life completely independent of the film. It was re-released as a standalone single. It found its way into the cultural bloodstream, and it became one of her signature recordings. The lyrics describe a moment of pure connection, That specific experience of looking at someone you love and seeing the love reflected back in their eyes. No words needed, just that look. Most people have felt that at least once in their lives, and Dusty Springfield made you feel it again every time she sang it. Here is a fun fact that adds a whole layer to this recording. Dusty Springfield was, in 1967, privately navigating enormous personal complexity. She was a woman who did not fit neatly into the public image that the music industry required of female artists in the 1960s. She was navigating questions about her identity that the world around her had no framework for accepting. And yet she walked into the studio and recorded something this tender, this open, this willing to be emotionally vulnerable. That takes a specific kind of courage, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that just shows up and does the work. Why does this song sometimes get reduced to background music, elevator music, movie trailer music, ambient sound? Because it became ubiquitous. Because it was used so many times in so many contexts that people stopped registering it as a specific, intentional, deeply personal piece of art made by a specific, complex, extraordinary human being. Dusty Springfield was one of the greatest vocalists Britain ever produced, and The Look of Love is the sound of her at her most unguarded. Treat it with the respect it deserves. We are halfway through this countdown now, and I want to stop for a second and ask you directly, which song on this list has reached you the most so far? Drop the number in the comments. I read them. Every one. Number 5. The Temptations. I Wish It Would Rain.
Sunshine, blue skies, please go away.
Let me paint you a picture. It is late 1967. You are somewhere in a city, maybe Detroit, maybe London.
A girl has found another and gone.
Maybe somewhere in the Caribbean where American soul music travels on shortwave radio and reaches people who have never been anywhere near Motown but feel the music like it was made specifically for them.
Away with her went my future. My life is.
And this song comes on. That opening, those strings, that slow, deliberate build before the first word is even sung, and then David Ruffin's voice, raw, broken, real in a way that makes you forget for a moment that you are listening to a record and not standing next to a man who is genuinely falling apart.
Filled with gloom, so day after day, I stay locked.
I Wish It Would Rain is a Motown record, but it does not feel like most people's idea of Motown. It does not have the usual celebratory energy, the bright tempo, the let's get up and dance feeling. This is Motown going somewhere darker, somewhere more honest, somewhere that recognized that the people buying these records were not always happy.
Up in my room, I know to you, it might sound.
Sometimes they were sitting alone, sometimes they were hurting, and they needed music that sat with them in that hurt rather than trying to rush them past it.
Strange, but I wish it would rain.
The song was written by the brilliant team of Norman Whitfield, Barrett Strong, and Roger Penzabene, and it was produced by Norman Whitfield at the famous Hitsville, USA studio in Detroit. The production is a masterpiece of emotional architecture. Every element, the rain sound effects woven into the recording, the strings that feel like they are aching, the rhythm section that holds everything together without ever becoming the focus, serves the central emotion of the song.
I wanna go outside, but everyone knows.
The lyrics describe a man so heartbroken, so destroyed by the end of a relationship, that he cannot face going outside during daylight. He wants it to rain so that people will not see him crying.
That a man ain't supposed to cry. Listen, I
so that the weather will match what is happening inside him, so that the world outside will carry some of the weight of his grief. That is not a pop lyric, that is literature.
Gotta cry, 'cause crying.
The song reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and performed strongly across R&B and soul charts. In the UK, where Motown had a devoted following, particularly within the Caribbean and Black British community, this record was felt very deeply.
This is the pain, oh yeah. People just hurt.
It was not the kind of track that packed a dance floor. It was the kind that made people go quiet and look into their drink and think about someone they had lost.
I feel inside. Words could never explain. I just wish it would rain.
Here is your fun fact. Roger Penzabane, one of the song's co-writers, was reportedly writing from his own real experience of a failing relationship while he worked on this song.
Rain. Oh, let it rain, rain, rain.
Tragically, he died by suicide on New Year's Eve, 1967, just weeks after the song was released. He was 29 years old. The depth of feeling in those lyrics was not invented. It was lived. Why does this song sometimes disappear in Temptations conversations? Because the group had so many extraordinary records that even their deepest cuts get crowded out. When you have a catalog that includes as many classics as the Temptations had, some gems get lost simply because there are too many gems competing for the same space.
Let it rain.
But I Wish It Would Rain deserves its own conversation, its own space, its own moment of silence and respect. It earned that. Number 4, Procol Harum, A Whiter Shade of Pale.
We skip the life and let go.
And here we are. I told you earlier in this video that one of these entries carried a controversy behind it, a story that went deeper than the music, a dispute that lasted not years but decades. And that dispute is still not fully resolved today.
Turn cartwheels across the
Let me set the scene first. A Whiter Shade of Pale was released in May 1967. It spent 6 weeks at number 1 in the UK. It sold over 10 million copies worldwide.
floor.
It was voted the number 1 song of the last 75 years by a BBC poll of music industry professionals. It is considered by many critics and historians to be one of the most important recordings of the entire 20th century.
I was feeling kind of seasick.
And behind all of that, behind every accolade, every poll, every moment of cultural recognition, there is a legal and personal story about who actually created it, about who deserved credit.
But the crowd called out
About what happens when a piece of music becomes worth tens of millions of pounds and the people who made it cannot agree on who contributed what.
for more.
Here is what we know, presented as fairly as possible. The song was written by Gary Brooker, the vocalist and pianist of Procol Harum, and lyricist Keith Reid. That is not in dispute. The melody, the lyrics, the structure of the song, that is theirs.
The room was humming harder.
But the famous keyboard riff, that descending organ line that opens the song and runs through it and makes it instantly recognizable to almost anyone alive in the last 60 years. That keyboard part was played by Matthew Fisher, the organist.
As I see
For decades, Matthew Fisher received no songwriting credit on the record. He was listed as a performer, a session player, someone who executed someone else's vision.
feeling flew away.
And he accepted that for a long time. But as the song's cultural status grew, and as the financial rewards from royalties became enormous over decades of licensing and usage, Fisher eventually went to court in the 2000s to claim a co-writing credit for his contribution to the composition.
when we call out for love.
Some people say the keyboard part was entirely his own creation, an improvised original contribution that shaped the very identity of the song. Others say it was developed collaboratively in rehearsals and sessions, drawing on influences including Johann Sebastian Bach's Air on the G string, and that Fischer's role was as an interpreter rather than a composer.
The wedge brought a train.
The case went through the UK court system over several years. In 2006, a High Court judge ruled in Fischer's favor, finding that his organ part was indeed a significant compositional contribution, deserving of co-writing credit and a share of future royalties. That ruling was partially appealed, and the final outcome was a nuanced legal settlement that acknowledged his contribution without fully overturning decades of prior arrangements. There are different versions of the story depending on who you ask. Gary Brooker and Matthew Fischer both gave interviews over the years where their accounts of those recording sessions diverged in meaningful ways.
As the miller told his tale.
Keith Reid had his own perspective, and the truth, as it almost always is in these situations, probably lives somewhere in the complicated, human, imprecise space between all of their memories. What this controversy did to the song's legacy is interesting. For many listeners, it added a layer. It made the song feel more real, more human, more complicated, exactly like the lyrics, which are famously surreal and open to interpretation.
Face at first just ghostly.
A song that nobody fully understands, created in a process that nobody fully agrees on, carrying a beauty that nobody disputes.
Turn the water, shade out.
The industry politics underneath this are important to name. In 1967, session musicians and band members who contributed creatively to recordings were frequently not given writing credits, regardless of their actual contribution. The power in a band and in the legal agreements around recordings was concentrated at the top. If you were not the named songwriter before the tape rolled, you often had no claim to what happened after. This was not unique to Procol Harum. It was standard practice across the industry. And it cost countless musicians, particularly those from working-class backgrounds who could not afford legal representation, enormous amounts of money and recognition over their lifetimes. Matthew Fischer's case was significant not just for him. It sent a message to the industry that creative contributions made in recording sessions could be revisited and reevaluated, even decades later. It gave other musicians a legal precedent to look at. But the emotional cost of that decades-long dispute on everyone involved should not be minimized. These were people who made something extraordinary together in 1967, and the shadow of that legal battle lived over the song for a long time. What remains after all of it, past the courts, past the arguments, past the money, is the music. That organ, that voice, those words that nobody quite understands but everybody feels. And the feeling that in May 1967, something was created that the world was not ready for and has never fully been able to explain. That is the definition of a classic. Number 3, Aretha Franklin. Respect. You already know this song. You know every word. You have heard it hundreds of times. But I am going to ask you to do something difficult. I am going to ask you to hear it again, really hear it through the specific lens of what 1967 actually was. Because Respect in 1967 was not just a song, it was an event, it was a declaration. It was a moment where a woman, a black woman, stood at a microphone and said, with absolute calm and absolute certainty, that she deserved to be treated with dignity. And she was not asking, she was telling. In 1967, that was revolutionary. The song was originally written and recorded by Otis Redding in 1965, and Otis's version was from a man's perspective. A man coming home with money, wanting recognition from his woman. It was good, it was soulful, but it was conventional in its emotional framework. What Aretha Franklin did was take that song, flip its entire power dynamic, and make it something the music world had genuinely never heard before. She changed the pronoun, she changed the energy, she changed the meaning. And she added the spelling of the word, that sequence that everyone knows, that became one of the most iconic moments in pop music history and turned a decent soul record into an anthem for every person who had ever been made to feel small. The record was produced by Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records recording sessions in New York. The production was stripped back compared to the lush orchestral sounds of other ballads on this list. It was tight. It was muscular. It was built around the rhythm section and Aretha's voice and very little else. And that directness, that refusal to hide behind production, was part of what made it so powerful. The song went to #1 in the United States. It won 2 Grammy Awards. It became an anthem for the civil rights movement, for the women's rights movement, for any movement anywhere that was built around the idea that human beings deserve basic dignity from the people who claim to love them. Here is your fun fact. When Aretha Franklin walked into those Atlantic sessions, she brought her sisters Carolyn and Irma Franklin as backing vocalists. Those voices you hear responding to Aretha throughout the record, that is her family. That call and response, that sense of communal affirmation, it was not manufactured in a studio. It was real. It was sisters in a room together, making something that would last forever. Why is respect sometimes taken for granted in music conversation? Because it is so canonical, so celebrated, so universally acknowledged as great that people sometimes stop engaging with it actively. It becomes a given, a settled matter, and settled matters do not always get examined. But go back and listen to Aretha's voice on that record. The control, the power, the specific quality of someone who knows exactly what they are saying and exactly why it needs to be said. That was not just a performance. That was Aretha Franklin telling the truth. And 1967 needed that truth more than it knew. Number 2. Scott McKenzie, San Francisco.
If you're going,
Be sure to wear flowers in your hair. There are songs that document a moment, and there are songs that create a moment. This song did both at the same time. And it did it with a gentleness, a genuine, soft, unhurried gentleness that almost disguises how significant it was.
to San Francisco.
1967 was the Summer of Love. You probably know that phrase. Young people gathering in San Francisco.
Be sure to wear some flowers.
Flowers and music and the belief, naive maybe, but real, that love and peace could actually change the world. that if enough people chose a different way of living, the old structures of war and hatred and division could simply dissolve. San Francisco was the sound of that belief. It was the invitation. It was the song that made people pack their bags and start moving west. And Scott McKenzie sang it with such sincerity, such genuine warmth, that you could not hear it without feeling at least a flicker of that hope yourself. The song was written by John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas and produced with a sound that was warm and folk-influenced acoustic guitar, gentle strings, a melody that moved like a slow river rather than a rushing stream. It reached number 4 in the United States and number 1 in the UK, where the idealism of the Summer of Love found a deeply receptive audience. The lyrics are an invitation. Come to San Francisco. Come with an open heart. Come ready to meet gentle people. Come ready to be part of something new. There is a specific kind of beauty in music that asks you to believe in something. That does not argue or explain or justify, it just opens a door and says, come through if you are ready. San Francisco was that kind of music. And in the summer of 1967, hundreds of thousands of people walked through that door. Fun fact, Scott McKenzie himself was not a regular performer on the Summer of Love circuit. He was not a San Francisco native. He was not part of the inner circle of the counterculture movement in the way that some artists were. He was a singer who happened to record this song at this moment, and the recording connected with a cultural wave so powerful that it carried him to a kind of fame he had never expected and, in many ways, never quite knew how to live inside. Why does his name sometimes fade in the retelling of 1967? Because the song became bigger than the singer. It became symbolic of an era, of an idea, of a moment in history, and in becoming symbolic, it lost its connection to the specific human being who stood at a microphone and sang it. Scott McKenzie is sometimes reduced to a footnote in the story of the Summer of Love, when in reality his voice was the sound that opened the story. The summer ended. The idealism faded or matured, depending on your perspective. All across the nation. But the song stayed. And whenever it plays, for just a few minutes, 1967 is not history. It is right now. It is happening again. And the flowers are still in your hair.
If this song just hit you in that quiet place, don't let this moment be a one-time thing. Subscribe to Demo. We're building a home for real R&B and soul. The kind that heals, the kind that tells the truth. Hit subscribe and come back whenever you need a song that understands you.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 1, Frankie Valli, Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
You're just too good to be true. Can't take.
And I want to be honest with you about why this song is number 1 on this list. Not because it was the biggest chart hit of 1967, not because it won the most awards, not because the most important critics said it was the most significant cultural artifact of the year.
Take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven.
It is number 1 because of what it does, because of what it has always done, And because 57 years after it was recorded, it still does it to people who hear it for the 100th time. Frankie Valli, Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
To touch, I wanna hold you so much.
Picture this. You are sitting somewhere, maybe alone, maybe not. And this song starts. That opening piano, those first notes building towards something you can feel coming before it arrives. And then Frankie Valli's voice, that extraordinary instrument begins.
At long last, love has arrived.
You're just too good to be true. And something in your chest moves. This is a song about one of the most specific and pure human experiences there is. The moment you look at someone you love, really look at them and feel overwhelmed by the fact that they exist, that they are real.
And I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good.
That somehow, in a world full of complications and disappointments and things that go wrong, this person is standing in front of you and you cannot quite believe your luck. That feeling, that full, bright, slightly disbelieving joy of loving someone is what this song captures.
To be true, can't take my eyes off you.
And it captures it so completely, so precisely, that it almost does not matter what is happening in your own life when you hear it. The song creates the feeling inside you. It does not ask you to bring the feeling to it. It gives it to you.
Pardon the way that I stare.
The song was written by Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio and produced with a classic, lush, late 1960s pop arrangement building from that gentle piano opening to the orchestral swell to the famous full-throated, arms-wide-open chorus that makes you want to stand up wherever you are sitting and sing along at the top of your voice. That build, that release. It is one of the most satisfying musical structures in the entire pop canon.
There's nothing else to compare. The sight.
Frankie Valli recorded this at a point in his career where his signature sound, that extraordinary falsetto he had built his career on with the Four Seasons, was being balanced against a more full-range, grounded vocal style. And on Can't Take My Eyes Off You, he used both.
Of you leaves me weak. There are no words left.
The early sections are warm and grounded. And when the song opens up into the big chorus, his voice lifts and expands and fills every corner of the recording.
To speak, but if you feel like I feel,
The song reached the top 5 in the US charts and performed strongly across multiple markets internationally. Over the subsequent decades, it has been covered hundreds of times by artists across every genre imaginable.
please let me know that it's real. You're just
It has been used in films, in television, in advertisements, in weddings and proposals, and moments of pure joy around the world for nearly 6 decades. Here is your fun fact. Frankie Valli was not initially certain about this song.
too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off.
By his own account in various interviews, there was a period where he was not sure the material was right for him, that the production style was a departure from where he had been as an artist. He recorded it. He trusted the process, and the result became one of the most enduring recordings of his entire career. That is a lesson worth holding on to. Sometimes the thing that feels slightly unfamiliar is the thing that is meant for you. Why is this song sometimes left out of 1967 conversations? Because 1967 is so often discussed through the lens of the counterculture, Sgt. Pepper, Summer of Love, protest music, psychedelia. And a big, beautiful, classically structured love song does not always fit that narrative. Critics who wanted 1967 to be entirely about revolution and experimentation sometimes looked past records like this one. Records that were doing something older and perhaps quieter than revolution records that were simply perfectly capturing what it feels like to be alive and in love and grateful. But the people knew. They always know. and they have been playing this song at their most important moments for 57 years. Not because it is revolutionary, because it is true.